Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? What's new? Glad you're all with me. So glad to be talking to you tonight. I am in front of the bookshelf. Yes, yes. It's a small apartment. I don't often have the ability to film in the living room here in front of my bookshelf, especially when other people are home because of the pandemic. But luckily, tonight I am in front of my bookshelf and I'm talking to you from in front of the bookshelf, and we're going to have a great conversation. So glad that you're here. So glad that you're with us. If you haven't done so already, hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. People have been telling me they haven't been getting notifications. People have been telling me they've been mysteriously unsubscribed. So be sure, be absolutely positively sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications bell button so that you get informed of all these conversations. Because I want to talk to you, you want to talk to me. We have a lot to talk about, and I want to make sure that you all are here. Post this on Reddit, post this on Facebook, post this on social media. Get out the word. Do you hear my phone ringing there? I don't know why my phone is ringing. That is awkward, but I'm going to go hang it up. So, strange night. I guess that's one of the dangers of being in the living room, is that at some point the landline phone, which I don't know why I have, because I don't use it, but for some reason I have a landline phone and it rings. So now it did not ring. Confirm Caleb wears pants. Well, they're shorts actually. They're shorts, but they're pants. Yes, indeed, I do wear pants. Yeah, it's one of those social conformity things, you know. Society mandates that we wear pants, so I do indeed wear pants. But yes, folks, I'm glad you're all here with me tonight. What is the landline phone number? Yeah, I'm going to tell you that. Yeah, totally going to tell you that. Lovely time, folks. So, folks, you're with us here tonight. A lot of crazy things are happening in the United States of America. I intend to talk about many of those crazy things in our broadcast this evening. So, the format we've been using for these lives is I give my prepared opening remarks, then we do our roll call, and then after I do the roll call, then I start answering your super chats. And so, if you have a super chat, be sure to throw it at us. And, give us the super chat, and I will be sure to answer it. And, you will get an answer if you give me a super chat. It may not be the answer that you want, but that's life. You don't always get the answer that you want. But in my case, you will get an answer. You will get an answer. So I'm going to talk to you about politics. I'm going to talk to you about the global economy. I'm going to talk to you about a lot of things that are happening. So why don't we just jump right into it? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's talk. Orange juice. Unnamed orange beverage. Folks, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, at the risk of sounding cliche, the risk of sounding comical, at the risk of sounding archaic, I'm going to begin this live by talking about something that I was always told was called the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you wouldn't like something to be done to you, don't do it to other people. If there's a way that you would like to be treated, treat other people that way. It's pretty old-fashioned. Certainly not specific to Christianity, as some people mistakenly believe. Confucius said it many years before Jesus. It's in the Jewish tradition and the Talmud. It's in the Islamic tradition, which came much later. The golden rule, the maxim, was it was taught by Zarathustra, the ancient Persian prophet. Any religion, any civilization you go to, you will always always find this basic understanding. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Empathy. Try to imagine how other people feel, and based on that, adjust your behavior accordingly. Think about how your actions might affect other people, and adjust them in order to be considerate of the other person. It's pretty basic. It's pretty simple. Not that complicated. However, the People's Party, okay. However, we live in scary times, folks. Very, very scary times. And I think the scariest aspect of our times is that this basic premise, this basic understanding, is being very widely eroded and not just ignored, right? Because, people have always been selfish. People have always been not thinking of other people. People have always been inconsiderate. People have always been cruel. Yes, these things happen. But we live in a time where there is almost a feeling on the part of many, many people that this golden rule, that this basic maxim that holds civilizations and societies together should be abandoned. And it's very scary. And it should be very, very scary. Because when people stop caring about other people, when people no longer think of the impact of their actions on other people, it leads to society coming apart really, really, really quickly. Right? There's a quote that is on the walls of the U.S. Department of Justice. It says, "Where law ends, tyranny begins." Now, if you think about it, that might sound strange. Where law ends, tyranny begins, but it's very true, right? If there is no law, there is no morality, it becomes the law and morality of the jungle, right? The strong simply rule over the weak. It just so happens that in our society, in capitalism, your strength is based on your wealth. Those with the most wealth are the strongest, and those with the least wealth are the weakest. So where law stops, tyranny begins. These are scary times that we live in, folks. These are very, very scary times that we live in. There is a feeling on the part of many, many people in our society that selfishness is a virtue. There's a feeling on the part of many, many people in our society that individualism and the lifting of restraints upon the individual should come before all else. Basic human morality is being constructed in order to fulfill the ideals of capitalism. Right? Capitalism burst into the world screaming in the United States about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In Britain, about life, liberty, and property. In France, about liberty, equality, and fraternity. The birth of the Western capitalist civilizations was the birth of individualism, the birth of the belief that restraints upon the individual should be lifted. Now, on some level, that's a good thing, right? People want to have more freedom. They want to have more choice. They don't want to be restrained. Certainly, no one would aspire to return to feudalism by any means. But human beings are collective creatures. Every product in every store was packaged by hundreds of workers, created by hundreds of workers, delivered by hundreds of workers. It's being sold to you by workers. There is nothing in the world today that anyone can point to and say, I made this all by myself. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'm talking to you right now into an iPhone. Now, I wish it was a Huawei, but that would not be legal because Huawei phones are not available in the United States. So I'm talking to you over an iPhone. This iPhone I have in front of me is the result of the combined labor of thousands of people. Think about it. The minerals, the plastic, the oil that makes the plastic, the minerals that make the chips, all of this, the wiring, all of this is the result of the work of thousands of workers. Some people say, well, what about a wood carver, Caleb? He can say he made his wood carving all by himself, can he not? Can't a wood carver who carves beautiful little sculptures out of wood, can't he say that he made that wood carving all by himself? Well, I would maintain no, he cannot, because in order to carve that wood, he's going to use tools. And those tools he got were made in factories by thousands of workers. And to sell his wood carvings, he's going to have to utilize perhaps the internet or a wood carving festival or a wood carving show or a store of some type. Nobody in this world can sit there and say, this thing I made is simply a product of me. Nobody. Nobody can say that. Everything in the world today is produced collectively, as the result, usually, of many thousands of people, maybe hundreds, maybe tens, but nothing is made on an individual basis. In our modern times, everything that exists, every product, every commodity, is the result of combined human labor. And that's how human civilization has always been. In earlier times, we were hunter-gatherers. We lived in tribes of 20 to 30 people hunting and gathering under slavery, and eventually feudalism, and even up in today capitalism. Everything we have created has been collective. The brilliance of the human species is our collectivism. We are collective creatures. We're not like tigers who only see another tiger when they mate, right? We're not like that. We have always lived in bands, in groups. We've always been collective. That's just the nature of humanity. There are very few things that I would point to as an example of quote-unquote human nature. Human nature is a bit of a, what do you call it? It's a bit of a canard. It's one of those, well, that's human nature. Well, humans behave very differently under very different circumstances, right? The nature of human beings under feudalism, the nature of human beings under hunter-gatherer civilization was very different than it is now. But regardless of all of that, one thing you can say it's pretty constant about the human species is that we tend to operate in a collective manner. That's why this pandemic is so difficult, right? That's why the social distancing and social isolation has been so painful for so many people, because we long, we hunger for other people. When you get into someone else's presence, it's almost like you're eating. You're getting nourishment. DNC. Seeing someone else, learning who they are, hearing their experiences, engaging with them is nourishment. That's why, in prison, they have what they call solitary confinement. And it's a form of torture, where they lock somebody away, where they don't see anyone else, except for maybe the jailer who gives them a piece of food or something, right? That's why it's torture, because human beings need to see other people. And in fact, if you're in solitary confinement long enough, you begin to lose your mind, right? They talk about people who have been in solitary confinement for a long time. When they come out, they've lost the ability to make eye contact with other people. They have to relearn the ability to make human eye contact. It can do permanent neurological damage to people if you put them in solitary confinement for an extended period of time. It's a very, very important thing for human beings. We are collective in nature, and our collectivism requires us to think of other people. It requires us to have empathy. It requires us to strive to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Now, to be fair, it's impossible to 100% do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Right? On some level, empathy can only go so far. You can't get into someone else's brain. Your instincts of self-preservation are going to override, the instincts of somebody else for self-preservation, except in some circumstances, right? I mean, there are exceptions to that where people take huge risks to benefit other people and such, but naturally, yes, your instincts towards self-preservation are going to come before empathy. It's not, it's not 100% that you will always put other people's needs before your own. I mean, it's not normal, that people completely get to the point where they would live by the old golden rule maxim, but they strive to. It's an ideal. And part of socializing people, it's part of making a civilization work, is getting people to understand. Getting people to understand that basic concept that you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. But what's very, very bizarre is that the rise of capitalism, and particularly the rise of imperialism, just ordered History of the Three Internationals. Well, you're going to love it. You are going to love it, and you're going to learn a lot from it. The Three Internationals. Now, the rise of imperialism involved huge efforts to try and destroy people's empathy. Huge efforts to try and make people much more savage, much more brutal, much more predatory in nature. Huge efforts were made to try and redefine the way human beings think in order to make them more ruthless, more sadistic, more cruel, and more indifferent to the feelings of others. And I talk about this in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. I talk about the Atlanticist pathology and how when British capitalism moved on to the stage of imperialism, when it became no longer about industrial capitalists, making profits, but it became about global financial cartels dominating the world economy and beating down the economies of developing countries. That period that Lenin referred to in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where the rise of international monopolies developed. That period involved an attempt to kind of reinvent civilization. And in doing that, some pretty strange things happened. We had the rise, for example, of serial killers. Serial killers had not been a thing before. I mean, there'd been murders before. There'd been people who did murders, but that Jack the Ripper stuff, where the guy goes and sexually kills prostitutes, right, and cuts them up in a bunch of pieces for sexual satisfaction. That hadn't happened yet. But in 1888, when Jack the Ripper was in the Whitechapel district of London, and he would hire prostitutes, whoever this wealthy man was, he would hire them and cut them up into a bunch of pieces. The world was just completely horrified because that kind of thing didn't happen. I mean, horrendous crimes of that nature just didn't happen. And what was even more horrifying was that after the Whitechapel murders became widely publicized, the London Times started getting all kinds of letters in the mail from people claiming to be Jack the Ripper. And of course, most of these people were not Jack the Ripper, but it was like they had this desire to send letters and pretend they were Jack the Ripper. And because hundreds and hundreds of letters were coming into the London Times from people claiming that they were the Whitechapel murderers, the actual Whitechapel murderer, whoever he was, I think we still don't really know who he was. We've got some pretty solid theories, but no one really knows who the Jack the Ripper Whitechapel murderer was. In order to prove that he was the actual murderer, he sent human organs in a letter. The infamous From Hell letter contained the actual organs of one of the victims. One of the victims who was killed, this murderer preserved one of their intestines or something really disgusting like that and sent it. And they even tried to see if it had come from an animal. The doctors wanted to make sure it actually came from one of the victims, and it did. It was pretty awful, pretty horrendous, right? But the serial killer stuff started to become much more widespread after that. But the first major, quote-unquote, serial killer was this Jack the Ripper. Pretty horrendous stuff. And I guess one point that really must be made is right now there is a huge effort on the part of the right wing to convince us that fascism is left-wing. This is big. Dinesh D'Souza, Jonah Goldberg. Jonah Goldberg wrote a book called Liberal Fascism. Dinesh D'Souza has this whole thing about how, Hitler was a Marxist, blah, blah, blah. He's just like Hillary Clinton. This is a big theme among the right wing. And it's also pretty big among the pseudo-left, right? As bizarre as that sounds, right? I mean, they're always calling right-wingers fascists, but if you're a leftist with whom they disagree, they call you a fascist, right? There's this almost this consensus now among the distorted politics, among the synthetic left and among the right wing, that we are going to rewrite history to declare that fascism is left-wing, right? They do this, right? On the right wing, fascism is just a form of socialism. On the left wing, oh, you're a socialist, you disagree with me? You must be a Strasserite, Nazbol, Nazi, fascist, communist. This is something that is widespread. But there's a movie, like not even a movie, a short, a Walt Disney short produced during World War II that you can watch, 1943, called Education for Death. And if you watch Education for Death, a Walt Disney cartoon designed to explain why we were fighting against the Nazis, if you watch Education for Death, it becomes very clear that the Nazis were not left-wing, right? They're not left-wing. You watch it, there's one particular scene in Education for Death in which, basically, you have a Nazi teacher, and he's drawing on the chalkboard that a wolf has devoured a rabbit, right? And so then he asks the class of students, what's your reaction to this? And one student says, the poor rabbit. The teacher becomes furious. No, 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 no. That's awful. We do not feel empathy or sympathy for this rabbit that's been devoured by a wolf. Oh, no, no, no. What is the real message of the story? The message of the story, they say, is that strength shall rule, that brutality shall rule. I mean, you listen to this, right? They're basically, teaching children not to have empathy. Where did that come from? I mean, that came from capitalism and imperialism, right? They were trying to break down the sympathy for those who might be oppressed. They were trying to break down human empathy, to glorify brutality, to unleash cruelty, sadism, and all that. That's right wing. That has always been right wing. That's why Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand is very, very popular. That's a book that argues that human empathy, compassion, kindness, that it's weakness. That's basically what they argue. There's a problem. Dual power. That this is a flaw in human civilization when people think of other people. And one thing I will absolutely say, is that we're in very, very dangerous times right now. We're in very, very dangerous times because there is a big effort on the part of our ruling class to deconstruct human civilization. From the right, from the left, both sides are actively trying to take apart human civilization, to unleash the law of the jungle, unleash human selfishness, unleash greed, break down any form of solidarity, break down any sense of group identity, break down any form of collectivism in order to build up individualism, to break down the human race to a collective of just atomized individuals so that capital and the richest of the rich will be completely unrestrained in their rule, both domestically and internationally. That is a process that is happening right now, and it's very, very frightening. And right now in the United States, we are witnessing a society coming apart because of this. Right? That's basically what we're witnessing. Now, thank you, Adam. Folks, I watched some of the Democratic National Infomercial, the DNI, I'm calling it, the Democratic National Infomercial, the Democratic National Convention that was over YouTube and on television and such. I watched some of it. I mean, I found it very difficult to watch. It just kind of bored me. I just didn't, couldn't really pay attention to it that much. Folks, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist from Bronx and Queens here in New York, who's a superstar, who's got how many followers on social media? She's got comic books about her life. She's just the rising star of the Democratic Party. Trump singles her out to yell at her at events. She got a total of 1 minute to speak. Meanwhile, they gave a whole presentation to John Kasich, the Republican governor of Ohio, who was a standard Republican, just a standard Republican, just an austerity Republican. At one point when he was governor, they wanted to build railway, light rails, in Ohio, and he stopped the federal government from doing it. He was an austerity Republican, a standard run-of-the-mill conservative, but he doesn't like Trump. So there you go. He got center stage. It was quite a convention, the Democratic National Convention. Now, of course, the highlight was Joe Biden's big speech last night, which was pretty moving presentation. I give him an A+. He did a good job. I was expecting at least, one misspeech or racial insensitivity or confusion or something like that. Nope. No, he nailed it. He did a great job. Kamala Harris, her presentation was about what we expected. A lot of emphasis on her mother, who she kind of canonizes. A lot of emphasis in her introduction on the fact that she is a woman of color and that her ascendancy to the vice presidency would inspire many women of color that believe that they could play this role. One particular line stood out in the speech. During the speech, Kamala Harris said, quote, "I know a predator when I see one. I know a predator when I see one." And afterwards, there was kind of an awkward, what they might call a pregnant pause. And she said it with this kind of like determined look on her face. Now, a lot of people who watched said, okay, well, that just refers to Donald Trump, right? That refers to grab her by the you-know-what, and Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. But many people may not be aware of the fact that Kamala Harris has refused to retract her statement saying that she believes Joe Biden. She believes not Joe Biden, but she believes the people who accused Joe Biden, the women who accused Joe Biden. Kamala Harris says she believes them. She said that. When 4 women came forward and said that Joe Biden had sexually assaulted them, she said, I believe them. And she has refused to retract that statement. And her words, quote, "I know a predator when I see one," combined with her refusal to retract that statement, are quite interesting. And it's also quite interesting that Kamala Harris got onto the ticket 9 days after Joe Biden said he was going to announce it. Joe Biden said he was going to announce the candidate for vice president from the Democratic Party, his running mate, as they call it. He was going to announce that on August 1st. He did not announce until August 10th. Just a day prior, the Democratic National Convention's speaker's schedule was published. Kamala Harris was on the speaker's schedule, separate from the vice presidential nominee. Very interesting. A few hours before Joe Biden made his announcement, Kamala Harris unfollowed Joe Biden on Twitter. Furthermore, even though months back, when Joe Biden announced it would be a woman of color who would be his vice presidential running mate, everyone said, Kamala Harris, easy. And then Joe Biden spent months not deciding, which was very, very odd. Very, 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 very odd. And then out of the blue, we all heard about a woman named Karen Bass. Karen Bass is a member of the House of Representatives from Los Angeles. And all of a sudden, Karen Bass was on national television. And people were saying, oh, maybe it'll be Karen Bass. And then, all of a sudden, the Washington Post and the New York Times and all these newspapers started publishing this claim that, they had all this information about Karen Bass. Oh my gosh, Karen Bass went to Cuba in the 1970s with the Venceremos brigades. Oh my gosh, Karen Bass said good things about Fidel Castro. Very strange. All these newspapers got the exact same information just around the exact same time. And instead of, fitting it into things, they all decided to run articles just trashing her as a Cuban government puppet, as a communist. And Karen Bass, of course, is coming out and saying, I'm not a communist, I believe in God, I'm religious, I'm a member of a church, I'm not a communist. Very, very interesting. Very, 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 very interesting. So, Joe Biden picks Kamala Harris as his running mate. She drops this little hint, in her speech about she knows a predator when she sees one, and she's not retracting the allegations against Joe Biden. Folks, I wrote a book. That's why I wasn't as active. I've been very tired lately. I saw the Kamala Harris thing coming months ago, and you all know that. Months ago, I told you there's a very, 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 very good chance it'll be Kamala Harris. I have people I talk to, and I knew this, okay? And, I was hoping that maybe we could show the dark side of Kamala Harris. We could point out who Kamala Harris really is, her record as a criminal prosecutor who jailed the parents of truant school children, tried to keep innocent people on death row, who had a whole pattern of concealing evidence to try to keep people locked up, the queen of mass incarceration. I was hoping that awareness about that might go out, and that maybe Joe Biden would be convinced to pick anybody else. And I think that Joe Biden wanted to pick somebody else, actually. But that is not what happened. We all know that now Kamala Harris is the vice presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. And if you have watched my videos, you know how dangerous Kamala Harris really is. You know how dangerous she is. And you know that basically she is the Hillary Clinton State Department. She was selected by the very same people who backed Hillary Clinton. It's very well documented. Her party is in the Hamptons. She was the Hillary Clinton candidate. The people who backed Hillary Clinton put their money behind Kamala Harris. And on top of that, the people who did not like Hillary Clinton went after her. Tulsi Gabbard, right? Who Hillary Clinton referred to as a Russian agent. Tulsi Gabbard used her limited time on the debate stage to take a swing at Kamala Harris. Very interesting, eh? Right? And Hillary Clinton called Tulsi Gabbard a Russian agent. Tulsi Gabbard sued Hillary Clinton. Folks, there is a fight going on behind the scenes. It's not QAnon. It's not Russiagate. But there are disagreements among the elites of the United States. There are different agendas. There are different strategies. Yang as VP would have been a slam dunk victory. Yeah, Yang. Well, folks, there are differences among the elites of the United States. And the Hillary Clinton State Department was a faction that Obama did not like and fought with. Joe Biden fought with. It was a faction that obviously the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party didn't like. Obviously Donald Trump didn't like. There's a particular faction, and Kamala Harris represents that faction. And so I have written a book about this. I've written a short pamphlet. Are you on Weibo? I am not. You should follow Quishi there. Okay, great. I'm not on it. Quishi, though. I have print editions of Quishi. But all right. But folks, the book will be out soon. It's with the proofreaders now. It'll be laid out and it'll be online. Probably next week, if not the following week, but probably next week it'll be out there. It's not long. Not a long work. It's 3 parts, and I draw from all kinds of things, and it's about a lot more than just Kamala Harris. It's about a lot more than just Kamala Harris. It's about the United States. It's about the country. It's about the distortion of leftist politics. It's about the personalities of political leaders. It's about the economic crisis facing the United States. It's about Syria. It's about Libya. It's about Honduras. It's about many, many different things. But if you are somebody who's new to all of this, new to Marxism and all of that. I think you'll get a kick out of this piece. It'll be available soon. You can order copies. It'll be less than $10. It's not going to be expensive. Because it's a short book, very small book, booklet, pamphlet, really. It's kind of a preview for my upcoming book on the synthetic left. It's like a little preview for it, basically. So it'll be out pretty soon. So y'all ought to keep your eyes out for it. But in the opening introduction to that book, to the pamphlet, booklet, whatever you want to call it, I make the point that I am not, and let me emphasize this again, people get me wrong sometimes, I am not trying to make the case that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are worse than Donald Trump. That's not my argument. I don't know which candidate is better. I don't know. In some ways, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are worse than Trump. But in other ways, they're better than Trump. Right? I mean, Joe Biden's speech, a lot of things he said were pretty moving. And a lot of things Donald Trump has done have been pretty reprehensible. Don't get me wrong, right? On issues like police brutality, issues like immigration, I'm closer to Joe Biden and Kamala. Will they practice what they preach? I don't know. But on other issues, not so much. I don't know which candidate is better, honestly. I used to know. Up until 2016, every election, my feeling was always the Democrats were better. I haven't seen it. My thought was that the Democrats are better, but they just don't believe what they're saying. That was kind of my belief. The Democrats try to sound like they're better than the Republicans when they govern. They tend to do what Republicans do. Voting for the Democrats is a trap, blah, blah, blah. But it was always assumed that the Democrats were better than the Republicans. I don't think that necessarily anymore. I don't. I'm just being honest with you. They're better in some ways, but in some ways they are worse. And what was very clear from watching the Democratic National infomercial was that at this point, the Democratic Party is becoming the ruling party of the United States. They are becoming the hardliner party of the United States. The late Cold War in the United States, you had the neocons and the evangelicals that were in with the military, they were in with the CIA, and, there was this solid core in U.S. society that were evangelical Christians and neoconservatives, and that's who ran the United States. And the Democrats believed they were the ones that wanted to water that stuff down a little bit. But yes, starting in the 70s, that was the late Cold War normal, went up into the 90s, even went up into the Bush years. That's how American politics was. American politics was defined by, Republicans are the hardliners and Democrats are the moderates. Not anymore. It seems that the Democrats are now the hardliners and the Republicans, far right on foreign policy, yes, indeed, Dems on foreign policy. Seems that now Democrats are becoming the ruling party, and Republicans are becoming a weird right-wing populist deviation or something like that. They are deconstruction. You got QAnon. QAnon is a very, very strange development. QAnon is basically this strange conspiracy theory that the government is run by satanic, blood-drinking, cannibalistic pedophiles, and Donald Trump is on the inside, moving behind the scenes to fight against them. It's very, very, very strange. But folks, I guess I'll just get to the point. Because all of this really, I can't wait for this election to be over. I cannot wait for this election to be over. I am sick of it already. And I'm worried about it because no matter who is declared victor, there's going to be a lot of painful aftermath, right? If one side wins, the other side is going to declare it to have been fraud, no matter which side it is. Democrats are already saying voter suppression against the Republicans. Republicans are saying the mail and the rigging through the mail. They're both setting the stage for the results not to be accepted. You look at what's happening in Belarus right now. I very much fear that something like that could happen in the United States. Because both sides are beating the drum and getting us ready for it. And you talk about all the militia groups and you talk about all the protesters and, thoughts on the U.S. seizure of Iranian oil. Whatever's going to happen, and it's not going to be good. The aftermath of this election is not going to be good. And we're going to be talking about it nonstop. We're going to be talking about the results of this election nonstop, for a long time. And I'm ready to stop talking about this election. I am ready to stop talking about it because I want to talk about what actually really matters, and that's that capitalism does not work. Capitalism does not work. The roots of all this instability that we are seeing, both internationally and domestically, is that capitalism does not work. Capitalism is a system of production for profit, right? Under capitalism, we don't have houses because people need a place to live. Under capitalism, we have houses so that landlords and bankers can make money off of it. Andropov, all right. Under capitalism, we don't have food so that people can eat it. Under capitalism, we have food so that agribusiness and big box stores can make money selling it. We have production for profit, production for sale, not for use, sellability, not usability. And because of that, we have a big problem, which is overproduction. The capitalist is constantly driving the worker to produce as much as possible, but he's trying to pay the worker as little as possible in order to produce it. He's trying to replace the worker with a machine. He's trying to reduce human labor. And the result is that pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. Right? Workers are also consumers. Only workers produce surplus value. You don't get any surplus value from a machine. So as a result, the rate of profit among the capitalists decreases. And on top of that, the workers cannot buy back the products they produce. You have a situation called overproduction. This is the built-in destructive mechanism of capitalism. The worker can never buy back the product that he produces, no matter what, right? A worker can never buy back the product that he produces. The capitalist is constantly looking to maximize profits, produce the most for paying as little. The worker can never buy back the product he produces, and this leads to an economic meltdown. And that big, prolonged economic crises in capitalism tend to come following a huge leap in the means of production. The computer revolution is causing a huge systemic crisis right now in the United States. Millions of people have no place at the assembly line. The capitalists have no use for them. Capitalism doesn't work. Production according to profit doesn't work. The anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, profits in command, does not work. You cannot continue to have a society where profits come first. And that's leading to instability. People are going to be hungry. People are going to be upset. And people are going to be not well. And there's going to be roads crumbling. And there's going to be, problems with the infrastructure. And there's going to be all kinds of problems. Societal instability will abound. As the rate of profit decreases, the capitalists become more and more desperate. They scramble and fight with each other. Contradictions among the bourgeoisie are going to escalate. The capitalists will be fighting with each other over their profits. They won't be all friends after 6, like Ronald Reagan used to say, any longer. There are going to be more instability episodes in society. This is what happens when capitalism enters a crisis. When capitalism enters a crisis, you get instability, you get the rise of fascism, you get the people rising up and demanding justice, you get sections of the ruling class trying to seize power in order to suppress other sections. It's all the result of capitalism in crisis. That's what we're dealing with right now. We are dealing with the fact that production according to profit, production organized for profit, doesn't work. It's not working anymore. It's an outmoded system. The only way we can resolve this problem is for the banks, factories, and industries to be organized, and thank you, Sarah Honduras, to be organized in order to serve public good and not profits. We need a system where the means of production are controlled by society and operated in a rational way. That is what we need at this time. We absolutely need that. And if we don't get that soon, we're going to have a problem with climate change. We're already having a problem with climate change. We're going to have a problem with mass hunger and starvation. We're going to have a problem with new, bigger, and dangerous wars. All of this is rooted in the breakdown of the capitalist system. Essentially, the world is a little bit constipated. It needs to do something, but it's blocked. And we have to be the ones to unconstipate the world, if you want to use gross language. We have to get beyond production for profit. We have to get to a higher and more efficient mode of production. And if we don't, the left will be left behind, the West will be left behind, because they're already doing it. They're already doing it in Eurasia, folks. Folks, you know, I like to talk to you about the successes of socialism. I like to focus on the successes of socialism. I don't just like to run down capitalism all day, because a lot of people will do that. But if there's no alternative, then there's no point. Folks, I have with me here not a Marxist publication, not a communist publication, not a pro-China publication at all. I have with me The Economist. Look at the cover. Xi's New Economy, referring to President Xi Jinping. This is The Economist. This is the voice of neoliberal, free market, capitalist economists. This is what they are saying about China's economy. China's economy was less harmed by the tariff war than expected. It has been more resilient to the COVID-19 pandemic. The IMF forecasts a growth of 1% in 2020, compared with an 8% drop in America. Shenzhen is the world's best performing big stock market, not New York. Mr. Xi's new economic agenda is to make markets and innovation work better within the tightly defined boundaries subject to the all-seeing Communist Party. Since 1995, China's share of the world GDP at market prices has risen from 2% to 16%, despite waves of Western skepticism. Silicon Valley chiefs dismissed Chinese tech firms as copycats. Wall Street short sellers said that ghost towns of empty apartments would bring a banking crash. Statisticians worried that the GDP figures were fiddled with, and speculators warned that capital flight would cause a currency crisis. But China has defied the skeptics because they call it state capitalism. It's not state capitalism, it's socialism. Its socialism has adapted, changing shape. 20 years ago, for example, the emphasis was on trade, but now exports account for 17% of the GDP. They say Shinomics, they say, has three elements. First, tight control over the economic cycle and the debt machine. Second, the second strand is a more efficient administrative state whose rules apply uniformly across the economy. And the final element is blurring the boundary between state and private firms. State-run companies are being compelled to boost their financial returns and draw in foreign and private investors. Meanwhile, the state is exerting strategic control over private firms. Folks, look at the way Vietnam, China handled the pandemic. Look at the way we're dealing with it right over here. Folks, socialism is the future. It's not perfect. Socialist societies have a lot of corruption. In fact, the only places that have ever had socialism have been countries that started at a far, far lower level of development. They never went through the Industrial Revolution there. They were kept in a pre-industrialized state, by Western capitalism. They broke free from capitalism in order to industrialize with a state centrally planned economy. But they're moving ahead. Meanwhile, here we are in the United States, being told that individualism becomes above all else, that selfishness is a virtue, that you are yourself all alone, you have no loyalty to anything, you can just be selfish and cruel, you have no obligation to your fellow human beings, greed is good, production for profit, Atlas shrugged, virtue of selfishness, capitalism the unknown ideal. It's a nightmare. It's very much a nightmare, folks. But we can build a way out of this. We can do it. Right? We got to start at the beginning. We got to build the community that comes around these lives. We got to start promoting socialism in a way that it's not being widely discussed. We have to get to a new understanding of socialism. We have to get to a socialism that isn't about tearing things down, but about building things up. We have to have a constructive socialism. We have to re-understand Marxism, Leninism. We have to understand the successes of societies that have built socialism. But we can do it. We have no other choice. We have to do it. In moments like these, when history's challenge is presented, folks step up to accept the challenge. It doesn't happen as quickly as we would like. Right? Often it takes a while for the mass consciousness to catch up with the crisis. But it's going to happen. We're going to build something good, and we're going to get out of this disaster. I'm confident in us, but I need you. And you need me. We're in this together. We're a community. And the Center for Political Innovation, we are going to bring real socialist consciousness back to the United States. I'm getting contacted by people. Somebody contacted me on the West Coast the other day and asked for 50 copies of the Green Book, of our edition of the Green Book we published. 50. Hey, I'm on the West Coast. I'm working with a group of people. We'd like 50 copies. Sent me the money. Boom. I sent them the copies. Boom. They're distributing them already. We're still in a pandemic. You can't have public gatherings. These people, they want 50 copies. They want to spread the word. It's amazing. We got the new book on Kamala Harris that's coming out. We're going to be holding conferences and seminars. We're going to be educating the people in that DSA milieu. We're going to be educating the people that are confused, perhaps, by Trump's demagogy. We are going to get out of this mess. And I'm ready to start doing that again. And this election, I just wish it would be over. I wish it would be over because it's not ultimately going to lead to anything that will really get us out of this. This election is a bit of a dead end. It's a bit of a tragedy. I wrote a book on it. I wrote a book about Kamala Harris, so I did something, right? I tried to use it to make some points and get people to understand it. Whoever wins, we're going to lose. And we need to realize that the way out of this is socialism. So that concludes my opening remarks. So, folks, I've got some super chats here already. Keep them coming because I will answer your super chats. But yeah, folks, names and locations, I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Las Vegas, Nevada, Itzel. Names and locations. Who's there? Let me call you out as I see you. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Jack Dundee in the UK. Pennsylvania, USA, Will DeMarco. Hi from Bendigo, Australia, David Fox. Dan from Iran. G in Cincinnati. Tucson, Arizona, Patrick Miller. Dante from Southern California. Rocky in Boston. Sam Levin in Los Angeles. JT24 in Mississippi. Long Island, New York, Will Lotz. Hello from the United Kingdom. Warren, Vermont. Dean, Newcastle. Audrey in Auckland, New Zealand. Oklahoma, Jared Carr. Orlando, Stuart Edwards. Richmond, Virginia, Hernan Montanoia. Los Angeles, says Lena. Welcome. Lily in Atlanta. Enrique in Newark, New Jersey. Rescued account. Lancaster from Lancaster, Ireland. Mo from Pomona, California. Bavaria, Germany, says Andres. Bennett Lloyd in Queens, New York City. Canada. Vallejo, California. Lagos, Nigeria. Birmingham, New York. Austin, Texas. Kendall from San Diego. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. Connecticut. Pittsburgh. Campinas, Brazil. Occupied Mexican territory. Tampa, Florida. Herb Bryant. Leipzig, GDR. Charlie in Glasgow, Scotland. Leipzig, East Germany. ILWU Local 13, Wilmington, California. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Raleigh, North Carolina. Woo! Woo-wee! Palo Round Mountain, California. Kenny from Malaysia. Kansas City. Helen from Melbourne. Jamestown, New York. Deutschland, Germany. Dothan, Alabama. Who else is with us today? Alrighty. I will answer your super chats as they come. I always do that. Florida. Boris is in Florida. All right. So Helen, I believe, asked about the People's Party. Right. Well, there is an organization called the Movement for a People's Party. They were going to have a counter convention to the Democratic National Convention. Well, there's not any convention really going on. Like I said, it was a big infomercial. You can't have gatherings. But Nina Turner, who is associated with the Bernie Sanders movement, is part of it. And it's very exciting. I think a lot of people in the labor movement, a lot of people that were Bernie Sanders supporters, are starting to realize the Democratic Party doesn't much care for them and doesn't want them around. Now, what will that lead to? There's been talk of a Labor Party. There's the Working Families Party here in New York, and there's been rumblings about this, but we'll have to see what happens, right? If Joe Biden loses, it's very possible that the Democratic Party will break wide open. If Joe Biden wins, it might be a moment of weird reunification for the Democratic Party. But if they lose this one, if they somehow manage to lose this one, because Donald Trump is pretty widely hated and the polls seem to be in their favor, and Donald Trump is not doing his rallies and beating his chest, and Donald Trump looks pretty weak right now. But if they manage to lose this one, which, give them credit. The Democrats are very, very, very good at losing. So if the Democrats manage to lose this one, I predict that will lead to a big shakeup in the Democratic Party. But if they win, I think we can imagine to see, some reunification. So it's complicated. War criminals like Negroponte endorsing Joe Biden, sure. Negroponte. Alrighty. Democratic National Convention, I was asked about it, I touched on it. Painful, giant infomercial. Joe Biden's speech was okay. The clapping on the screens, that was pretty weird, right? It was almost kind of like sitcoms, right? Where, on sitcoms, they don't have an audience there, but somebody says, "Well, what do you mean, Jenny?" And then you hear this, "ha, ha, ha, ha," in the background, and it's like a laugh track. It was like they had like a clap track, they would give their speech, and then there'd be these screens of people going, it was kind of silly in that sense. A lot of little films, like touching movies. They were really plucking your heartstrings. I'm gonna be curious to see how well the Republicans do. Will the Republicans be able to have a streamed convention infomercial of the same, quality, the same caliber as the Democrat convention? I expect that they will, but I wonder what it will look like. I am almost, in a weird way, I wasn't thrilled to watch the Democratic convention. I really don't want to watch the Republican one either, but I'm kind of mildly amused to see, how are they going to one-up this? What do you do in response to this? How do you answer this? Well, we'll see next week. We shall see next week. But yeah, I'm sick of this election. I really am. I'm tired of it already. I'm really, really tired of it. Okay. History of the Three Internationals. Lily, you will learn a lot from that book. It's a very, very good book. And you may want to check out the study sessions of it that Dust James and David Fox have been doing. They have been going through the book part by part and discussing it. So you may want to check that out. I recommend History of the Three Internationals. I have never learned as much as I learned when I read that book. The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster is probably the most educational book I have ever read. So I hope you read it. I hope you study it closely and learn a lot from it, because it's a very important book. And it's out of print, but I was able to contact Red Star Publishers. How do you think aforementioned Chinese stock markets work in comparison with Western counterparts? Oh, very good. Stock markets. Alrighty. Dual power. Thoughts on Bill Clinton taking a shot at Kwame Ture? All right, I've talked about that, but we can go over it again. Alrighty, as far as dual power, we're not there yet, but dual power is a revolutionary process by which, the working class builds up its own institutions on the verge of taking power. And you actually had dual power, during the revolution against feudalism, right? The House of the Burgesses, Burgess and bourgeoisie are the same word. Burgess is just an English version of it. You had the Continental Congress here in the United States. In France, you had the National Assembly. That new bodies, email received, new bodies. Why doesn't China do more to support? Okay, sure. Alrighty. Alrighty. But new bodies of working class power do emerge. And that's a part of the revolutionary process. The working class builds up its own strength in order to counter the power of the capitalists. It becomes more powerful, and eventually these new institutions come into being. That is the revolutionary process. You know, and there's Soviets, workers' councils are formed, new institutions are created in the process of revolution. That's very much, is refusing to vote for Biden accelerationist? No, voting for Trump would be accelerationist, but refusing to vote for Biden is your own business. You know, but yeah, I mean, you know, dual power is a process. And yeah, I mean, we need community assemblies. We need movements where people come together and build it. Absolutely. But before we do that, we need consciousness. We need consciousness. There needs to be a raising of awareness, because right now nobody has any clue what we're talking about. Class struggle ideology is missing. The history of Marxism is missing. There needs to be a raising of consciousness. If these institutions come into being organically, which, you know, it's going to happen, but there's no one that has revolutionary ideology, it won't matter. Spontaneity in and of itself does not lead to socialism. That's the whole point of Lenin's book, What is to be Done. So, you know, dual power is great, and, you know, elements of it will continue to emerge. I mean, we're seeing things like this coalition of African Americans that are armed as an armed self-defense group against the right wing. You know, we're seeing, you know, groups that are more, you know, involved in community stuff emerging, and as the capitalist system breaks down, this kind of thing starts to develop. But ultimately, without revolutionary ideology, it won't lead to socialism. Andrew Yang, yeah, well, you know, Andrew Yang is interesting. He put forward that concept of universal basic income, and he seems to represent a faction that is much more managerially oriented. You know, realizing that the problems that gave birth to Trump, the problems that gave birth to Bernie Sanders, the instability in society, the unemployment, the lower wages of the next generation are very, very real, and that they're a big problem, and that they're thinking, how do we socially manage U.S. society? Let's give people a universal basic income. Let's give people some money so they don't go out and riot. You know, and I mean, you know, he points his book. He wrote a book called The War on Normal People, which is very good because it talks about a lot of the problems that a lot of the U.S. media ignores. It ignores these underlying problems, but it highlights them, and a lot of the economic problems. So, you know, I have a positive view of Andrew Yang on some degree, but ultimately he sees universal basic income as a scheme to stabilize and save capitalism. Well, what we need is the banks, factories, and industries to operate according to public good and not profits. We need a centrally planned socialist economy. And he almost kind of says that. It almost reminds you of during the Great Depression, how there was the Townsend Plan, and there was, I mean, there was just everything but socialism. You know, there were a million, like, weird schemes put forward during the Great Depression. You know, and it's like, he can't be for socialism. And so he calls it human-centered capitalism. Well, it ain't human-centered if it's capitalism, my friend. Andrew, it ain't human-centered if it's capitalism. It's either human-centered or it's capitalism. But it's not human-centered capitalism. Alrighty. Escalate in the Mediterranean with Turkey warships. Okay, yeah. Turkey escalation. Alrighty. Kuei Shi. I actually have some issues of Kuei Shi here. This is the theoretical journal of the Chinese Communist Party. And when I started getting China Daily, they started sending them to me. I recommend it. I mean, if you have any doubt that they are serious Marxists in China, you should read this. This is serious Marxism, right? This is ideological stuff. Have you heard of Domenico Lusardo? Yes, I have. I have his book on liberalism over there. I just haven't had the time to actually sit down and read it, but I'm very familiar with his work. All right, Dems on foreign policy. Yeah, the Democrats, Caleb, I am lobbying you to give me a shout out because I was the one driving your name. Whoa, repeat that. Driving your name. What was it? Sorry. What was it? I was the one driving your name. Someone repeat that. I didn't see the whole thing. It's from Shaniqua from Buffalo. I just didn't see it. Can someone repeat it? So I want to see what it fully said. I was the one driving your name. I was the one driving your name. Driving during names and locations. Give me a shout out. Gotcha. Well, Shaniqua from Buffalo, shout out. Sorry you were driving and couldn't type in, but you're definitely there. Excellent. Very, very good. Very, very good. All right. Dems on foreign policy. The Democrats, I mean, Donald Trump has certain foreign policy constituencies that he's very, very specific to, like the anti-Iran lobby, like the Miami lobby. Could you emphasize the importance of comrades in raising class consciousness? Absolutely. Raising. Dems on foreign policy. Yeah, the Democrats, in a lot of ways, the Democrats are thinking long-term about the strategic rule of the United States and rolling back Russian and Chinese influence. Donald Trump is pandering to specific foreign policy lobbies, like Netanyahu, like the Gusano lobby in Miami, like the anti-Iran, the Shah folks. That's who he's pandering to. He doesn't really care ultimately about the long-term interests of the United States. Joe Biden is with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rockefellers, and they're thinking long-term, right? And that's the divide, right? Trump is trying to make money for weapons manufacturers. Donald Trump is thinking about the long-term interests of Western capitalism. Joe Biden is, I mean. All right, Iranian oil seizure. Yeah, I mean, Iran has said this is not our oil and this is not our tankers, right? The left are going to stop fighting with each other. All right. Left infighting. I mean, Iran has said this is not our oil tanker, and it's not our oil. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like Iran sold it to somebody who sold it to somebody who sold it to somebody who's taking it to Venezuela. So the USA seized it, and Iran said that's not ours, right? I mean, is it possible the oil came from Iran? Perhaps, but it's like these are not Iranian ships that were seized, and the property on those ships was not Iranian. Now, with sanctions and all, there's often like middlemen companies, and that's probably what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, the United States is bullying both countries, and I mean, what right does it have to tell Iran and Venezuela they can't trade with each other? On what grounds? On what basis, right? You lock Venezuela out of the global economy, you lock Iran out of the global economy, and they say, okay, USA won't trade with us, we'll trade with each other. And now the USA, no. This is called piracy. It's called theft. Alrighty. Could Andropov have been the Deng Xiaoping? Well, it's never as simple as one individual, you have to understand, right? Andropov was from that old generation, just like Deng Xiaoping was from that generation. Yes, Kuishi is in English. It's in English. Yeah, it's a great publication. It's the Chinese Communist Party's theoretical journal. It's great stuff. They have 4 issues in English a year. I think it's much more frequent in Chinese, but I'm sorry, last super chat, repeat it. Something about Harris. Something about Harris. Wow, we're all over the place tonight. It was the last super chat was something about Kamala Harris. What was it? I didn't see it. Could Harris reconcile? Would Harris, hinder with Iran? I'll talk about that. But yes, Andropov was from the older generation of the USSR, just like Deng Xiaoping had been on the Long March with Mao. So, in a way, you could see that. But I think the problems in the Soviet Union were bigger than one person. Is that the Soviet Union had not developed the proper mechanisms to change their socialist system. Right? They didn't really have the mechanisms to adjust it, and that was the problem. Is that China was able to reinvent their system. China. The Soviet Union. 1928, they started to really develop. Like the socialism in one country system. After World War II, it was very solidified, and the Soviet Union was around a lot longer than China had been around. China, at first, they were not going to have a socialist country, right? At first, they were only a people's democracy. Let's remember that. There were millionaires and billionaires. Well, not billionaires. There were millionaires in China at the time, and throughout the whole 1950s, right? 1949, they had the revolution. Up into the late 50s, you had millionaires and all kinds of stuff. In the 60s, they tried to become fully socialist. They tried the Great Leap Forward. It didn't work out too well. They backed away from it. Then they had the Cultural Revolution. And then, after the Cultural Revolution, you have the rise of Deng Xiaoping theory. It was like the system wasn't completely locked down and solidified. It was very fluid. And it remains that way. And this is, Operation Mockingbird. That is one of the strengths of the Chinese system is that it is very, very fluid. And the reason that Andropov and others, and ultimately Gorbachev, undid the USSR is because the Soviet system became very solidified. 1928, it was basically became what it was. At World War II, it was fighting for its life, and it became very, very rigid and applied, and it was very, very unable to bend. Whereas the Chinese system has been very fluid from the beginning. Very fluid, right? I mean, what they were in the 50s was not what they were in the 60s. What they were in the 60s was not what they were in the 70s. What they were in the 80s is not what they were in the 90s. China keeps changing. And that is China's strength, that their socialism constantly is in a state of evolving and adapting. It's brilliant. Negroponte. Well, yeah, I mean, Negroponte, he's a neocon. He was involved with death squads in Nicaragua. And he was dispatched by the United States, by the Hillary Clinton State Department, to work with the coup in Honduras. He's actually associated with Battalion 316, which is a brutal death squad that operated in Honduras and assassinated leftists and innocent civilians. And yeah, in response to the planned coup, when about 10 days before the planned coup to overthrow Manuel Zelaya, the elected leader of Honduras in 2009, in response to that, Hillary Clinton dispatched Negroponte, John Negroponte, to go to Honduras to work with the coup plotters. And he is a mass murderer, and he is, not a good guy. Not a good guy, but, that's the Hillary Clinton State Department, right? And that's who they work with. And Hillary Clinton is responsible for probably hundreds of thousands of deaths in Honduras, right? The fact that not only did she support the coup, right, and she knew about it, and it's very likely Barack Obama didn't know about the coup, because when the coup in Honduras happened, Obama, best books, when the coup happened in Honduras, Barack Obama said it was not legal. Hillary Clinton jumped in to support it. But Barack Obama, he said, yeah, the military over there in the government, it's not legal. And it was like, dun, 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 dun. And they never forgave him for that, too. The Republicans brought that up in debates. Like, oh, my God, he supported the Marxists. It's like, no, the military violently overthrew the government. Obama was just, yeah, I don't support that. I mean, and Hillary Clinton had been supporting it before it happened. And then Obama changed his tune as soon as he got the memo. But it was pretty sudden. But yeah, I mean, that whole coup, and I talk about it, I talk about it in the book when I talk about the Hillary Clinton State Department. It's a pretty wild story. So yeah, stock markets in China versus the West. Well, here's the difference, right? I actually wrote a very good article about this in 2015, because in 2015 the Chinese stock market crashed. Right? The Chinese stock market crashed. Huge numbers. And the U.S. media said, it's here! The great collapse! We've been telling you for years that China is going to fall apart, and it happened. See? We told you China's economy has crashed. This is the end of the Chinese People's Republic, blah, blah, blah. And within a week, their stock market was right back up to where it had been. Turns out less than 10% of the Chinese public is in any way tied to that stock market. Whereas in the United States, about 90% of the public is tied to that stock market, right? Whether it's the company you work at, whether it's your pension, whether it's a bank you invest in, bank with a bank that's tied. Everybody in the United States is tied to the stock market. The stock market is the U.S. economy. In China, the stock market is a vehicle for bringing in foreign investment. It's a betting casino for some of their capitalist class. But most of the economy has nothing to do with the stock market. That's the difference, right? The stock market exists to complement socialism. Same with Vietnam. Given the sickening number of war criminals backing Biden and the legacy of Obama presidency, would it be fair to say Trump is less bad? In some ways, but in some ways not. Like, it's not that simple, folks. As I said, let me repeat myself. I don't know which one is better. It's different. Different evil. Trump is in with Trump is in with the anti-Iran war criminals, the anti-Cuba war criminals, with Netanyahu war criminals. Joe Biden is in with the more long-term and strategic thinking war criminals. He's in with Bolton. He's in with the deposed head of the FBI, James Comey. It's different evil. It's not the lesser of two evils. It used to be the Democrats and the Republicans were the Democrats were the lesser of two evils. It was like the same evil in different doses. Now it's different evil. Pick your poison. You want this poison or that poison? And if you're a progressive person and you're genuinely progressive, you'll be disturbed by some of the things they're saying about Trump, okay? If you're a genuinely progressive person, some of the stuff they're saying about Trump should disturb you. He's encouraging people not to trust American media. Donald Trump is creating a situation where we lose faith in our government. Donald Trump is cozying up to dictators. I mean, as in dictators, he means anti-imperialist governments around the world, like North Korea. And folks, if you're a progressive-minded person and you watch that Democratic convention, over and over and over again, they kept saying that one of Trump's flaws was that he was, quote, cozying up to dictators. And they mentioned North Korea, and they mentioned Russia, and that you should vote for Joe Biden because he's going to be harder on those quote-unquote dictators, right? They accused Russia completely baselessly and falsely of paying for the bounties for U.S. soldiers. Now, they basically debunked, that story's been basically debunked. I did a whole thing on it, right? But, does facts matter? No. I mean, it's very, very frightening. It's very, very frightening. So, if you're a progressive-minded person, and you think Joe Biden is better than Trump, in some ways, Joe Biden is advertising to the world that he will be worse than Trump. But in some ways, he's better than Trump. In some ways, he's better than Trump when it comes to immigration. He's better than Trump when it comes to police brutality. He's better than Trump when it comes to, bigotry and cultures of cruelty. So it's complicated. But about the stock markets thing, China's economy is not centered around the stock market. The stock market exists to complement the state-run industries. And as I read to you from The Economist, state control over the market cycle and the debt crisis, right? Yeah. In China, these banks, they just don't get, the government calls them up and says, yeah, you're not getting repaid on this. Have a nice day. Click. That would never happen here in the United States, even though it could happen. And that's pretty weird, by the way. No one talks about this, but, one of the reasons that our public treasury is always in debt, right, is we're constantly making payments to banks from the public treasury. At any time, the government could say to the banks, you know what, hold on, we'll get back to you eventually. Do they do that? No. Right? And they say, well, what would happen, right? You remember the debt crisis, the debt ceiling crisis, where Obama wasn't paying back the banks, right? And then the USA's credit rating and all of that. Well, the government can tell banks what their interest rate is. You know that? The government can say to banks that lend the government money, and say to them, you will lend us money at this amount. And that was what was done in early American history at the time of the National Bank and Alexander Hamilton. But you don't know that now, right? Governments have, on paper, in the United States, governments can control banks. In the United States, that does not happen because politicians are stooges for bankers. But on paper, yes, politicians can control banks. They just don't. But yeah, in China, the private sector, there's a vast private sector, but it exists to serve the state at the benefit of the state. And at any point, it goes away. The private sector in China isn't really private. It's state controlled. Alrighty. Bill Clinton, Kwame Ture. Yeah, at the funeral of John Lewis, Bill Clinton made a comment about, he was afraid that the civil rights movement was going too far in the Kwame Ture direction. Check out Kwame Ture. He started the All African People's Socialist, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And he became a very, very committed scientific socialist. He didn't call himself a Marxist. He called himself a scientific socialist. Yeah, and I think that, there's a reason for that. There were many black nationalist and revolutionary leaders who came out of the 70s. So why did Bill Clinton make a dig at Kwame Ture in particular? Well, two reasons. One, Kwame Ture was very much, every speech is about socialism and how socialism is better from capitalism. Listen to it. He's talking socialism every day. Class struggle, socialism, public control of the means of production. He was all about socialism, number one. Number two, he was vehemently anti-Israel and pro-Ba'athist. He was very, very friendly to the government of Libya, very, very friendly to the government of Iraq, and very, very friendly to the government of Syria. And so he was often labeled anti-Semitic because of that. He was very, very anti-Israel and tied to anti-imperialist states in the Middle East, number one. Number two, he was very, very much a socialist. So I think that's why Bill Clinton, he didn't say it went too much like Farrakhan wanted, or it went too much. No, he said it went too much like Kwame wanted, like Stokely Carmichael wanted. That's why Bill Clinton said that, was because Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, became an outspoken socialist and an outspoken anti-Zionist and anti-imperialist. All right. Why doesn't China do more to support socialist revolutions around the world? Okay. let's review really quickly. All right, so the Russian Revolution comes into existence, and they form the Third International, the Comintern. Right, the Comintern is formed, Communist International, and the Soviet Union is associated with communist revolutionaries all over the world. And it's like, they're all going, every few years for a Comintern Congress. Well, that doesn't work out too well. During World War II, basically the Soviet Union is forced to dissolve the Comintern because they need capitalists. They need to align with capitalists against Nazi Germany. But in order to accommodate those capitalists, they can't be having the illusion. They can't be telling those capitalists, we want to violently overthrow your governments. The capitalists are going to be like, we're not going to work with you. So, because it's necessary to form an anti-fascist alliance in the aftermath, of the rise of fascism during World War II, they dissolve the Comintern. When they dissolve the Comintern, Mao says that's a very good thing because China has not been listening to the Comintern for a long time. The Communist International tried to fire Mao on many occasions, and Mao would rip those letters up and do what he wanted, right? That in some cases, the Comintern, the meddling of the Comintern in the affairs of communist parties in countries was not necessarily good. And that the needs of existing socialist states and the needs of people in the working class movement in capitalist countries are often very, very different. Socialist states function as states. They need to make alliances with other states. Meanwhile, working class revolutionaries are thinking about how can we get toward taking power. It's very different, very, very different. And if you're dealing with a country where the working class movement is not on the brink of taking power, which is most countries in the world are not on the brink of having a socialist revolution, the socialist state is going to have to do business with the existing capitalist government. So if they're funding people who are destabilizing the country and trying to make revolution, that doesn't work out too well now, does it? Now, let's talk about China specifically, right? So China was aligned with the USSR, and then they had a fight with the Soviet Union's leadership, and the Soviet Union cut off aid to China, left buildings half built, power plants and all kinds of supplies that were supposed to be delivered weren't delivered, caused big economic problems. So China, and then they were cut off from most of the socialist bloc. I mean, a few countries would trade with them for a while. Cuba was friendly with them for a while, and North Korea was friendly with them for a while, and Albania was with them for a while. But for the most part, most of the socialist countries of the world cut them off. So they're at a loss. And so for the first little bit, they tried to be ultra-revolutionary, right? China was like, we are going to be the most pure communist country ever. And when they did that, they were pretty isolated from the rest of the world, except for Albania, mostly. Albania and, a few other countries they had some relationship with. They were pretty isolated, but they were like, we're going to be ultra-revolutionary. Didn't work out so well. And, they started to have to make relationships, and they couldn't have a relationship with the socialist countries because they were cut off because the socialist countries were doing business with the Soviet Union. So they started to build relationships with capitalist countries. And one of those capitalist countries was Pakistan, right? In 1966, they built the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway, which is a huge, at the time, it was the biggest, most elevated road in the world. It's no longer, but it's a huge elevated road. But Pakistan at the time they had that relationship was a military dictatorship. It was a right-wing, pro-U.S. military dictatorship. But China said, hey, can we build a highway? Yes, I'll do that later. Can we build a highway? Yes. And, but later, Nixon went to China. China sat down with Richard Nixon. And that was during the Mao era. That wasn't Deng Xiaoping. That was Mao who sat down with Nixon. Let's remember that the Gang of Four were in power. China had friendly relations with Pinochet's government in Chile after the 1973 coup. They recognized Pinochet, and the Maoist Party of Chile, the Revolutionary Communist Party of Chile, wrote a big document saying, Mao, how can you do this? You've stabbed us in the back. And, that China's foreign policy, because the Soviets were seen as their enemy, became a pro-U.S. foreign policy. Well, the thing is, if we've learned anything from the Cold War, so the needs of socialist governments and the needs of revolutionary workers' parties are very, very different. China is not the Comintern. China wants to do business with countries around the world. It is not going to be able to do business with countries around the world if they're spreading communist revolution all over the world. Not going to happen. Not going to happen, right? So it's complicated. It's complicated, right? And China very much feels that class struggles in foreign nations are not their business. That's what they feel. Cuba has taken a different approach. Cuba is very involved in class struggles around the region in Latin America. So it's complicated. And socialist countries have to make that decision for themselves. Are there times, even the countries that are involved, right? I mean, Trotsky maintained that it was somehow Stalin's fault that Hitler came to power because he directed the German communists to have the wrong policy. Well, that's malarkey. But, Trotskyites, a lot of Trotskyites like Castro. But if that's going to be your argument, why do you not blame Fidel Castro for Allende in Chile, right? I mean, did Fidel Castro not advise the Chilean Communist Party? Did they not, not take power? Did a fascist regime not come into existence? So why do you, I already talked about that. Watch the last live about China invading Vietnam. I went into great detail about that. Or you can watch about that in my class, Mao and American Socialists. I'm not going to get into that now, but that answer was very helpful. Thanks. Good. Well, that's helpful. But the last live we talked about the Kampuchea War. I don't want to relive the Kampuchea War again. So please don't, maybe I'll address it down the road, but I get the same questions over and over again. It gets a little dull. So go back, watch my Mao and American Socialist class, watch the last live. I addressed that on both of them. All right. Okay, is it possible that Turkey will escalate in the Mediterranean? It is, but it will not simply be about Turkey. It'll be about the contradictions, right? We know what's happening now in Mali. The government has fallen. The guy who was supporting the French imperialists and allowing the French troops to come in, the population has kind of risen up against him, basically. Libya is in chaos. Turkey is positioning itself within Libya to try and fight against General Haftar. Turkey has its position regarding the Kurds in Syria, and, it won't just be Turkey. It'll be about the global system. And, Russia has been able to negotiate some with Turkey. Turkey, for a long time, was considered to be a U.S. puppet. It's a member of NATO. But, starting under the Obama administration, when there was that attempted coup against Erdogan, we saw Turkey start to move in a more independent direction, right? Turkey seems to be in a little more of a bourgeois nationalist independent phase. And so it can go either way, and because of that, yeah. All right. The importance of comrades raising class consciousness. That's very interesting. One of the older communists I worked with, she taught me something, which is she said, when you meet a person, ask them about their job, right? Ask them about their job and let them talk to you about it. Pan-Asianism. Let them talk to you about it. Ask people about their job and listen to them. Talk about it, because a person's job is their livelihood. It's the place that they spend the most parts of their life. Talk to them about their job. Find out what their job is about. Not only because you should be interested in someone when you meet them, and it's polite, but also because you as a communist need to know that. You need to know what people's jobs are like. You should be constantly trying to find out what people's workplaces are like, because that's something that a communist who needs to understand the economy needs to know. You need to know about people's jobs. Whenever you meet somebody, talk to them about their job, right? Talk to them about their job. It's very, very important. So that you, as a communist, start gathering the information about what their workplace is like, what their daily routine is like, what they're producing, what company they work for, what information they have about the global economy based on that, so it's important for you to get that knowledge. Number two, it's important for you to show that you identify with them as a worker, right? You don't simply identify with them as a cool guy or a cool woman who lives down the street, but you identify with them as a worker, right? And that talking to someone about their job is vitally important. And workplace analogies are very important when explaining politics. Now, nowadays there's not really a strong labor movement in the United States, so it's a little more difficult. But, when explaining why it's necessary to defend the Soviet Union, for example, talk about a labor union, People say, oh, the Soviet Union is corrupt. Well, is your union corrupt? Right? But would you prefer the bosses overthrow it? No. Well, there you go. Maybe we should make the Soviet Union better. Wouldn't your union be better if the bosses weren't on its back all the time? Well, yeah. Well, maybe the Soviet Union would be better if the bosses weren't coming down on the Soviet Union so hard. Right? They say the USA is a democracy. Say, have you ever gotten to elect your boss? Have you ever gotten to elect the person who runs the company that you work for? Is the government, do you have a say in how the company, jobs, workplace analogies, economic analogies are very, very, very important. You talk about, people talk about Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa, right? People say, well, wasn't Stalin an awful dictator and all that? And say, wasn't Jimmy Hoffa a tough leader of the Teamsters Union? Yeah, yeah, right? But did the workers in the Teamsters Union not benefit from what Jimmy Hoffa did, fighting like hell for them to get their benefits? Yeah. Didn't Jimmy Hoffa have to make deals with the bosses? Like Richard Nixon? Yeah. Right? So Stalin is a lot like Jimmy Hoffa, right? He was a tough guy who had to defend the working people of the Soviet Union. And he had to make deals with people who weren't so good. And he took action. If you got on the wrong side of Jimmy Hoffa in a labor union struggle, he was ruthless to defend his position as the leader of the union. Stalin was a lot like Jimmy Hoffa, right? And ask any Teamster, would you rather have not had the Teamsters with Jimmy Hoffa? Would you prefer that Jimmy Hoffa never existed? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Right? Many, many working people benefited from Jimmy Hoffa. But was Jimmy Hoffa ruthless? Yes. Did Jimmy Hoffa do things that you hope we never have to do? Yes. Did Jimmy Hoffa have to negotiate with people that are bad? Yes. So, just like, it took a Jimmy Hoffa to raise millions and millions of truck drivers into the middle class and, to have a decent income and all of that, the Soviet Union needed a Jimmy Hoffa in the 1930s. They needed a strong, tough guy to lead the Soviet Union, to defeat the Nazis, to get the Union going. Think about it, right? And Jimmy Hoffa, he had to make a deal, with Richard Nixon. Well, Stalin had to make a deal with Hitler, right? That the real class struggle you can't be happy, fun, nice all the time, right? That when people are fighting for their lives and fighting for their livelihoods, things get ugly. The bosses are ugly, right? And sometimes in the working class movement, you have to have a Jimmy Hoffa, you have to have a Stalin. The Soviet people, yes, it would have been great if they could have not had a Stalin. It would have been great if the Soviet Union had been just a completely open society, completely transparent. That would have been so much better. But it wouldn't have worked. Wouldn't have worked, right? In order for socialism to survive, they had to have Stalin, right? Well, in order for the Teamsters Union to do what it did, in the face of so much opposition from the bosses, they had to have a Jimmy Hoffa. Think about it. Workplace analogies are very, very important. Class consciousness, right? Talking about the ruling class. And talking about the ruling class not just in Caleb Go on Red Scare. I already did Go on Red Scare TV with Mason. I did it already. So I'm already on there. Talking about the ruling class, not as income level, but as owners of the means of production. This stuff is very, very important. Yes, raising class consciousness is very, very, very important. Alrighty. Left infighting. Will there ever be an end to left infighting? No, there won't. What will change is that some leftists will actually get to the masses. That's what will change. But I think the ultra-lefts are always going to be with us. The ultra-leftists will always be with us, right? There's always going to be ultra-leftist elements. There were Trotskyites in China. There was like the one Fourth International guy in China. And, ultra-leftism is always going to be around. There's a Trotskyite faction in Cuba. There's anarchists, so, it's this illusion that one day all the communist groups are going to merge into one. Not going to happen. And if it did happen, it would be a nightmare. It would be an absolute nightmare because in order to do anything, you would have to somehow get some kind of consensus and agreement from all of those folks that have never accomplished anything. So the main thing is that socialism needs to get to the broad masses of people. We have to get out of the left milieu. We have to get out of the movement and get to the masses. That's all that there is. And there will be some trends that will do that will figure out how to do that will wake up and do that. And there will be other trends that will not. And those other trends that will not will remain. They'll be around. People like reading about ideas. People like to, do what those groups do. And all those groups do one thing really well. I'll give you that. No matter what the group is in the United States, every left group does one thing well. The group that I was in for a long time staged protests and rallies really well. In New York City, we knew how to get the permit and get the stage and get the speakers set up and get all the signs made. Nobody could stage a protest rally Red Scare podcast. Never heard of it, but I'd happily go on it. Nobody could stage a protest rally better than they could. They had it down to an art and to a science. Good for them, right? There's one group, the Socialist Workers' Party of the United States, Pathfinder Press. They publish the works of Malcolm X. They publish classic Marxist books. They have really, snazzy covers. They run a very, very professional-looking book publishing company. That's what they do. They publish books. There's other groups that do, they all have about one thing they can do very, very well. Well, a real communist party, let's be real, a real communist party would do a lot of things very, very well. I almost think it's like an orchestra, right? In an orchestra, you got one guy who's playing the violin, you got one guy who's playing the trombone, you got one guy playing the piano, you got one conductor up there conducting. The way the Marxist movement in the United States is right now is it's like you have a bunch of people, but instead of being an orchestra, they all think that their instrument is the only one that anyone should play. So it's like the violinist is here, and he's shouting at the trombonist, and he's shouting at the conductor, I am the violinist. You should be a violinist. The violin is the instrument. If you're not being a violinist, you're a counter-revolutionary. And the guy playing the trombone is shouting, no, violins are counter-revolutionary. This whole orchestra should be trombones. And the conductor is saying, all orchestra, it should all be, right? A real revolutionary movement would have a newspaper and media, publications, and it would be selling it on the street. A real socialist movement would be in the labor movement and building the labor unions. A real socialist movement would be building anti-imperialist rallies and anti-war protests. A real socialist movement would be, making relationships with progressives and the Democratic Party. A real socialist movement would be organizing in communities and feeding people. A real socialist movement would be printing lots of books. It would be doing all of the above. That's what a real socialist movement would be doing. Right now, we have a bunch of groups that function in a period of reaction, right? When the U.S. working class wasn't going to hear it, the late Cold War normal, etc. And because of that, they all found one thing they can do really well, and then in order to justify their existence, they all say, this is the good thing, and if you don't do this, you're not doing anything, right? And it's kind of silly. We need to get to the masses of people. The main thing is we need to feed people. We need to build a community. We need to educate people. We need to provide services to people. We need to build something that's in neighborhoods, right? That's what we need to do. We need to get to the masses. And once we can get to the masses, once we can build a real movement, it would be doing all of the above. Would it be having rallies and protests? Sure. Would it be feeding people? Sure. Would it be having a newspaper and doing media publications? Yes. Would it be printing books? Yes. Would it be building relationships with progressives and social democrats and entering strategic alliances? Of course. It would be doing all of those things, right? But in order to do all those things, you have to get to the masses. Until you get to the masses, you're wasting your time. Get to the masses. Get to the masses. Okay, all right. Will Harris hinder with Iran? Well, it's very interesting. During the early years of the Obama administration, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Jared Andrew Cohen, who's now the CEO of Alphabet, Google Alphabet, formerly Google Ideas, right? He was working in the Hillary Clinton State Department, and he called up Twitter, and he basically told them to function in a certain way that would help destabilize Iran with protests during the quote-unquote Green Revolution. He called up Twitter and said, stay on, don't do your planned shutdown, make sure that you're on so that the Iranian anti-government, pro-Western folks can be manipulated by you. And Barack Obama was furious about this. And so he wanted to fire Jared Andrew Cohen. And Hillary Clinton said no. And Hillary Clinton says that she protected Jared Andrew Cohen and his efforts to stabilize Iran from Barack Obama. This is in the New Yorker magazine. Well, there you go. Hillary Clinton is much more anti-Iran than Barack Obama was, than Joe Biden was. And we also know that Kamala Harris is the new Hillary Clinton, that she was selected by the Hillary Clinton fan club, the donors, etc., all the people that threw their money at Hillary Clinton herself, they all got behind Kamala Harris. So, it would appear that Kamala Harris is more hostile to Iran. However, I'll just tell you folks, I hope that the nuclear deal with Iran can be preserved, right? Because that would mean greater chances of peace. But Trump killed Qasem Soleimani. Trump reimposed sanctions like crazy on Iran. I mean, Joe Biden wants to keep the Iran nuclear deal intact. Good luck. I mean, I don't know what he's going to have to do when he gets into office. If he's really serious that he wants to keep that Iran deal intact, he is going to have to do something when he gets back into office, if he wins, that really, really, really shows Iran that he ain't Trump. Because right now, Iran feels like they got suckered. And the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, says there won't be any negotiations with America. And a lot of people in Iran feel like they really, really made a big, big, big mistake by negotiating that Iran deal. So if Joe Biden is going to somehow preserve that Iran deal, when he gets elected, he's going to have to, I don't even know. I can't even think of what Joe Biden would have to do to convince Iran they can trust America again. Because Trump, not only did he pull out of the Iran deal, if somebody asks a question but can't afford it, I will sponsor them $5. Okay, all right, whatever. But yeah, I mean that's just the situation. I cannot imagine it's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. I mean, it is possible that somehow the Iran deal can be preserved. But it's very clear to me that what Pompeo is trying to do is make sure that there is no way that Trump can lose the election, but they have made the Iran deal irredeemable. Okay. Best books that I've been reading recently. Oh boy. I mean, I read Anna Louise Strong. I really like Anna Louise Strong's writings. I really like Edgar Snow's writings. I've been reading about the Rockefellers and Ferdinand Lindbergh, his biography of the Rockefeller family, Rockefeller Syndrome, the rich and the super rich. I've always really enjoyed Black Radical by Nelson Puri. It's a very, very good book. I recommend. But yeah, there's a lot of very good writing out there. I try to read, in terms of news, I read the Wall Street Journal, I read The Economist, I read Foreign Affairs, so I can know what the ruling class is thinking. I hate the New York Times because the New York Times is so coded and all of that. I just want them to give me the unfiltered party line for U.S. imperialism. What am I supposed to believe? I'm not going to believe it, but I need to know the unfiltered party line so I can respond to it, Yeah, so there you go. You want me to do my impression of Bill Clinton? I'm Bill Clinton, President of the United States. I want you to know that. Let me get the voice. How do you do it? Take a drink here. I'm Bill Clinton. No, that's too deep. I'm Bill Clinton, President of the United States. I just want you to know I care about you. I'm thinking about you. I may have gotten on the airplane of Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't do that. I don't do that kind of thing anymore. It was just a one-time kind of thing. I'm Bill Clinton. I wouldn't do such a thing anymore. I got on an airplane. Nothing bad happened on the airplane. What's in the box? I don't know. It's my wife's. I don't want to violate her privacy by opening it. That would be kind of rude now, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's my wife's box. So, I don't know. Jewelry or something. Alrighty. Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird, that was revealed that the CIA was manipulating news stories, and thank you, David, for laughing at the impression that Lily had super chatted requesting. But yes, Operation Mockingbird was revealed. It was basically the CIA manipulating news media. They had a Project Mockingbird, Operation Mockingbird. It was revealed by Ramparts Magazine, which was kind of a socialist magazine in the Bay Area. And they revealed that the CIA had this program of manipulating the media to push their agenda. And it was revealed. Very big revelation. You can Google it. I mean, it's got a Wikipedia page and everything. They planted fake news stories. They manipulated the media. It was all about manipulating the media to serve U.S. foreign policy goals. Alrighty. Oh, Pan-Asianism. Well, I mean, at this point, is unifying Asia into one country really a good idea? I I don't think that's realistic. There's many different governments in Asia with many different politics and stuff. I mean, I think the Trans-Pacific Partnership was kind of an aim to create a trade zone that would kind of economically unite Asian countries against China. That was what the TPP was about. But no. Are you a fan of cats, Caleb? Well, I've never had a pet. When I was a kid, I never had a dog, never had a cat. I've never owned a pet. Cats are nice. I like being around them. They, you rub them, and they go meow, and they're fun. But dogs are fun too. You pet them, and I've never had a pet. I've never been a pet owner. I will say I don't particularly, when you go to somebody's apartment and they have a cat, they have a couple cats. Sometimes that cat urine smell is there. I don't like that. I really don't like that smell. And I think that one of the problems of being a cat owner, I would assume, I've never been a cat owner, is that you kind of get immune to it. You don't realize that there's that cat urine smell in your apartment. So somebody else comes over and you're just like, ugh, cat urine. But whatever. I mean, other people, though. I've seen people who own cats. I've been to their apartment, and it's clean. Someone said they meant Cats production. Oh, well, the musical Cats. It looks dumb to me. Everything about it looks dumb. Poems by T.S. Eliot, who's a little bit of a conservative and kind of a reactionary, and I don't know. It's a little bit weird, isn't it? About like one cat goes to heaven or something. It doesn't look like the kind of thing that I'm interested in. But hey, what can you do? All right. Well, folks, it's been a weird day for me. A lot of things went as unexpected, but here I am. It's been a weird live. I was in a little bit of a different mood than I normally am, but I think I did an okay job, and you all are here and you're enjoying it, and we had a good conversation. So I think that's about it, folks. I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad we sat through. We've recovered from that DNC infomercial. Now we got the Republican infomercial coming along. Oh boy. But, we're going to get through this. This election will be over eventually. Please. And we can get back to the work that must be done. I don't know if folks know this, but there's an old communist song from the 1930s, the United Front song. Because a man is human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servants under him and no boss overhead. So left 2, 3, the work that we must do. Join on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. Well, folks, so left 2, 3, and left 2, 3, to the work that we must do. Join on in a Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. There's plenty of work that we must do, and it's difficult because of this pandemic. But it's the United Front song. You can Google it. And I think that kind of gets the essence, right? That there is so much work that must be done. So I wish we could get to it. We're all frustrated. I wrote a book on Kamala Harris, so I can do something. I will be sending a copy of the Kamala Harris book to every Patreon supporter who sends me their address. So if you're a Patreon subscriber, you will get one in the mail. I can tell how much I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, says Longmorn. Well, thank you. But, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of changing consciousness that must go on. There's a lot of big efforts that must take place, but every day is a struggle. And we're hoping we can get through this election. We can get through this nightmare of the pandemic and back to fighting for a better world in ways that involve gatherings of more than 10 people. So all my best wishes. I will try to stay healthy. Folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks.